Welcome back, everyone, to our QuaranSTREAMs Answers for COVID-19. As always, I'm one of your members at large on the Fairfax County School Board. My name is Abrar Omeish, and I am here with...
I'm Kimberly Boateng, the student rep to the school board.
We are on every Thursday and Sunday at 7 p.m. to provide you with updates on our school system and useful information for our families. Today, of course, we are aware of the challenges that are facing this country. In our previous stream, we made sure to talk specifically about race and devote a 3-hour chunk of time to covering the basics and giving everyone the 101 to catch everyone up to speed. So if you're interested in learning more about that, in educating yourself and beginning those steps of self-awareness, I would highly encourage you to check out that last stream. And we'll start off just to make sure that we are cognizant of what's on everyone's mind and what's weighing heavily on folks, with some thoughts from Kimberly before we move into our regular updates, and of course welcome some of our guests who are here today.
Yeah, just to briefly just kind of address it a little bit. As for everyone, I believe, who's watching, I think everything that we covered in our last stream is still very much on all of our minds. It's, if you still want to talk, if you still want to refer to some resources, please, I implore you to go look at the other QuaranSTREAM, look at all the resources that we listed out, and take a look after this QuaranSTREAM, of course. Take a look at the discussions that we had. Mostly everything that we talked about in that last stream still applies today. There's been many developments, like in terms of the George Floyd case. All 4 police officers have now been charged, and George Chauvin's degree has been raised up to 2nd degree. So multiple developments have come through with that story. Things are continuing to change, but still it's on the minds of everyone. And I encourage everyone to still dedicate themselves to educating themselves and learning more and having those tough conversations.
Thank you, Kimberly. And certainly as a school system, we are committed to equity, and the school board will be putting out our letter on this matter very soon. In other news, as always, if you want to make sure you get reminders for our QuaranSTREAMs, to text to 81010, the @ QUARANSTR for QuaranSTREAMs, to get those push updates. Today, we're going to be joined with a couple of our guests who have popped in here today. Michelle Cades, who is the president of our Fairfax County Special Ed PTA, SEPTA. Welcome, Michelle. Good to see you. And we have Anne-Marie Ward, who is part of the Governor's Transition Council, or their transition team on education and special ed and all of that, who can share some information with us today, and is also the outgoing treasurer of the FCC PTA, the Fairfax County Council of PTAs. Welcome, Anne-Marie. And we have Teresa Johnson, who is our Assistant Superintendent for Special Services. Very lucky to have you here today. Thank you for joining us. So about 7:15, after we give our school system updates, we will be providing information. We also have Jane Strong. Welcome, Jane, from our Department of Special Services with us. So very happy to have all of you. And I believe Denise Forrest as well. So we will have a discussion followed, in addition to, thank you, live Q&A for everyone later on from the stream. So feel free to send in your questions from now. Of course, our special needs community is another one of our marginalized communities, and we wanted to make sure we provided this chance for families to know what resources are out there. Couple reminders on the county level. June 23rd is the date for the primary. Don't forget, if you requested your ballot and you're an eligible voter, to turn that in, to make sure to drop it off at the post office so your voice is heard. As of right now, Fairfax County has approved the use of outdoor spaces for restaurants and exercise facilities during phase 1. The face coverings are required though, so make sure you wear those masks and gloves as you go outside to continue to make sure we stay safe and healthy. In Fairfax County, we do have 11,938 total cases. We're looking at 220 new cases just today and 417 total deaths. So it is still very serious. And while most of Virginia will be entering into phase 2 of their reopening plan on Friday, June 5th, which is just tomorrow, we remain in phase 1. So just be mindful. And Fairfax County, we're monitoring the situation on a local level and want to make sure we keep everyone safe and healthy. And a reminder, there are services for everyone out there who may be in need of healthcare, supplemental income, any kind of support. There's this coordinated services hotline The number is 703-222-0880. And as always, we include that in the description. Anything that you may need in this tough time, or if a neighbor needs it, that kind of thing, to be sure to reach out. The FCPS Foundation's Access for All Fund has raised $350,000 to date, helping our families in the toughest situations. So we're very proud of that and hope to continue seeing these efforts. And as Kimberly touched upon, before we move into some of our updates on technology, food, and academics, I did want to note the NAACP had a roundtable with our superintendent, with FCPS, to figure out how we're going to tackle racism in our own system. I want to make sure folks are aware that, again, as a school system, we are committed to equity. It is the value system that really motivates all of us here. And we want to also put out there that there will be a protest. I know a number of the FCPS families and students have organized on the 7th, just this weekend at 2 p.m. At the fountains next to Old Town Hall. So if anyone is interested, be sure to take safety precautions. They will be required as expected from everyone. Moving forward, Kimberly will give us some updates on technology, food, and academics before we move into our guest discussion.
So as of May 27th, there has been 22,190 laptops that have been distributed, 2,023 MiFi devices. And in terms of food, there has been 1,264,606 meals served so far in our county. So do you want me to also talk about academics? Okay. So we have 1 week left until the last week of school. So yesterday, 216,092 students attended 24,276 sessions. And for those students who signed up for, this is pertaining to juniors and seniors, those who signed up for the Jumpstart Nova, please check your Nova issued email, because those classes were set to start on Monday. And, this was also news to me because I just today started figuring everything out. So make sure that you log into those emails and complete any work that may be due, upcoming that's due. So, and also FCPS offers free online summer arts enrichment program from July 6th to August 7th, and registration is not required. So you have to email fasummerlearning@fcps.edu. That's fasummerlearning@fcps.edu. For more information, or visit the FCPS website. High school juniors assignments will be due today. Oh, okay, that's news to me too. Today, June 4th, Thursday. So, and there's been 13 FCPS students from class of 2020 that were awarded the National Merit Scholarship Corporation Awards and have received scholarships by select universities. Their names are Shreya, if I mispronounce your names, please forgive me. Shreya Tripathi, Danielle Beckstrand, Amy Smith, Sophia Tedesco, Benjamin Hacker, Josephine George, Sabrina Atkin, Clara Bowles, Justin Fang, Rohan Kalra, Keegan Laziota, I'm sorry, Keegan, Venkata Somzula, and William Wang. Currently, there are no—
Congratulations to those students.
Like, big congratulations. That's huge and amazing, and definitely a feat to like your hard work. So congratulations to everyone I just listed. And currently there have been no changes. There will be no changes made to elective courses offering for next year, as well as the requirement of credits needed to graduate according to the standards of accreditation.
Perfect. Thank you, Kimberly. Next, we normally have our special ed updates. So we'll segue right into our discussion. Of course, there was a notice on June 1st that was put out on the extended school year update, which I'm sure some of our guests will talk a little bit more about today. So we'll look forward to that. So without further ado, we will open up the floor. I'm very pleased to have our guests. Thank you all again for joining us. We can start off with Teresa Johnson, our FCPS team. And we'll go ahead and hear from our advocates afterwards. So Teresa, give us the rundown. What's going on in FCPS on special ed specifically?
Thanks, Abrar. We have a lot going on, as everybody can imagine. The last 5 or 6 days, we've actually been focusing on our return to schools plan, we've been working on a task force, quite a few of us, breaking down what the superintendent had directed us to look at 3 different scenarios and put together some plans of what those scenarios would look like, anywhere from distance learning to staggered schedule to students coming back full time, with the understanding that maybe students and staff wouldn't be able to, not all students and staff would be able to return at the same time. So we have been working very quickly, because this is a very quick turnaround, to develop those plans. And next week, that information will be presented to the board, the draft plan to begin with, and it'll be a very high level overview as we look at the what the plan might be, and then circle back and spend more time once we have a little more direction from the governor, which we're expecting next week, to focus more on the how we're going to implement that plan. So that's been the big thing, and we are moving forward. The board did approve moving forward with ESY in a distance learning format. So those IEPs have been underway for quite some time, the last month or so for sure. And we continue to look at, we were asked by a board member to look at if there could be a possible hybrid plan, returning with some support from whatever the governor might identify for us as a school system, or as Northern Virginia, since we seem to be in a different place than the rest of the state, what that could look like, and looking at that for the future and possibly for the end of the summer. So a lot going on, and we just appreciate the time to have the conversation today. So that's just a quick update on where we are.
Yeah, thank you so much, Teresa. And I will say, I'll attest to the fact that, to clarify for the public a little bit, right? The school board role is different than staff, of course. Teresa has the benefit of overseeing many of these programs, in addition to Jane and Denise, who I'm going to have speak in just a sec. And the school board works alongside them to monitor on a larger scale the entire system. So just for folks out there who are watching to kind of get the distinction. And I know, Teresa has been working very diligently, always incredibly responsive and very helpful. So thank you for everything that you're doing. We're very sad to see you retire this year, but certainly, happy for you and the milestone you've reached. So, Jane and Denise, maybe give us just a little bit about what you work on specifically, especially for the benefit of our viewers, so that they can know what questions to ask. You are muted, Jane, which happens all the time.
Now I'm unmuted, right? Hi. So I'm Director of Special Education Procedural Support. So what that means for anybody out there who doesn't know, DSS has 4 offices. So my office is one of them. And in our office, we have procedural support liaisons. 1 PSL, as we call them, are assigned to the schools by pyramid. And they assist the school staff and parents with anything having to do with implementing procedural things with special education, really all of it, especially IEP meetings. And then we also have within our group, we have the Due Process and Eligibility Office, and they deal with all manner of technical assistance to training, to administering any sorts of dispute resolution processes like mediation, responding to complaints, or due process hearing requests. And then the third sort of arm of my department is the staff that oversees IEPs for students who are in private schools. So the one thing I want to say that, we're working on, just to tag on to what Teresa mentioned, one of the things that we're really heavily working on right now is searching for the CDC guidance on how are we going to enable safety once school does resume. And that's everybody's hope, that we will get back to school. And so really looking at what are the special things that we need to do for our learners with disabilities and for our staff so that everybody stays safe. So all of that planning that Teresa mentioned, really looking at what the CDC guidance is and what can we do, especially for learners who have significant disabilities. And we want everybody to remain safe. So that's a brief overview, and like you said, I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Denise, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. So my name is Denise Forrest, and I'm the coordinator for early childhood special education. I sit on the same team with underneath Mike Bloom, who represents the Office of Special Ed Instruction. So I actually meet with them on a regular basis during this quarantine. We've been meeting every other day. And then Mike, Jane, and I are on the instructional task force, looking at how to bring students with disabilities back to through the 3 different scenarios that Teresa discussed earlier. And so we've been working really hard to try to figure out what instruction would look like in the 3 scenarios, and trying to make sure that we're providing equity to all of our students, at the same time as making sure that, as Jane mentioned, that they are going to be safe coming back, knowing that we have a lot of our students that have compromised immune systems, have different behavioral issues that might impact their ability to come back safely. And so we've been really thinking through all of the different scenarios. And I'm trying to figure out how to socially distance 2 through 5-year-olds.
No small feat. Thank you for all that you're doing. Appreciate the overview. So for folks to kind of position ourselves again, so again, we have the school board, we have staff, and now we also have our advocacy community. So we have Michelle here, who's representing the Special Education PTA. She's currently the president. So Michelle, maybe give us a sense of a little bit of what you guys do, and how you've seen some of the developments here as post-COVID in general, and then we can certainly move to Anne-Marie and open up to questions.
Sure. Thanks so much for having us on, Abrar. It's definitely been an interesting spring for our families of students who get special education. And our hope, and from what I've seen in our Facebook groups and our chats, things have been settling down and people seem to be getting into a rhythm and kind of finding the new, hopefully very temporary normal. It's been very exhausting for parents to not have that respite time from their kids when the kids are out of the house at school, and also to have to play the role of teacher assistant, and nurse, and speech pathologist, and occupational therapist, and physical therapist, and social worker, and all the other people who work with their kids typically. It's a really hard balance for many people. We have definitely heard that there is a subsection of our population that is really thriving on distance learning. There are a lot of kids with a lot of social anxiety, and those kids are doing pretty well, many of them, because they don't have to be dealing with all the sensory input that they have in school, and all the social dynamics of being with all the kids. The con being that they're not working on developing their skills in those areas at this time. So, you know, it's been up and down, certainly, for our families. And I'm hoping that people are looking forward to school wrapping up and sort of continuing with whatever we're going to have next during the summertime. There are definitely a lot of parents who are concerned about what is going to be happening for their kids in the summer. They're eager to find out more details about ESY for their kids who qualify for extended school year. And there are a lot of parents who really aren't sure how they're going to occupy their kids' time because of camps and programs being canceled. So we know there's a lot of uncertainty right now, and that's very anxiety provoking for parents. And I'm happy to go into some of the other feedback that I gave the governor later on after, the Secretary of Education for Virginia after Anne-Marie talks about some of her things too.
Thank you, Michelle. And we have the benefit of, you know, so SEPTA, right, positions itself as almost like a subgroup PTA, a member group, right, within the Fairfax County Council of PTAs.
Correct. We are our own PTA chapter. We just don't have a base school. So we represent families across the whole county. Right.
And so we have the benefit of Anne-Marie Ward, who is an outgoing FCC PTA officer, Fairfax County Council PTAs, and who currently is sitting on the governor's task force to figure out how we're transitioning all of this. So please, Anne-Marie, give us things from your perspective and a better sense of what you're up to.
Sure. Hi, thanks so much. I am very involved with the PTA, as you've heard. I do have children here in Fairfax in the Justice Pyramid, middle and high school. As part of my role on the governor's work group, I was chosen to represent parents specifically who have children who receive special education. My rising 7th grader receives special education services here in Fairfax County. I serve on the advisory committee for students with disabilities. So I have some experience working with FCPS, but this is my first experience working on a state level. The governor created a work group of all different types of education leaders. It is mostly education professionals, but they did want to have a teacher voice. They wanted to have a parent voice. And so they asked for a few of us in the group of about 45 people to sort of sit in and give our opinion on the various things that are being thrown around. I can't really say with any kind of specifics what has been discussed. Unfortunately, I wish that I could make some grand announcement, but that is not my place. The governor is going to be speaking coming up in the next week. I think Tuesday is the tentative date when he is going to announce sort of the starting process for how they see schools reopening in a phased process, like they're doing with businesses. And he's going to sort of explain all of that. And then the Department of Education is going to publish sort of a starting document of recommendations, which the school board obviously will be considering when you do your work sessions, and all of the people on this call, Superintendent Brabrand, everybody's going to look at these sort of suggestions, guidance to help them figure out what they're going to do in their school division. And that's something that I've sort of learned as I've been doing this. Virginia is a huge commonwealth full of lots of different types of school districts. Some of them are very small and rural. Some of them are very large like ours. And so the state can't really mandate a lot of things because each individual school division has to make decisions that are best for them, but there needs to be some standards. So that is, I don't have to make those decisions. Thankfully, the governor and the Secretary of Education, Autumn Carney, and the State Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Lane, they're the ones who are making the decisions. And we are sort of just supporting them. And my role is to listen and then to try to summarize. It's a very difficult task to try to represent every parent. There's only 2 of us from Virginia PTA. And of course, a lot of the people in our group are parents themselves, but that's not their role. So we have been trying to solicit information. The Virginia PTA did a survey. They got, I think the last that I heard, something like 40,000 responses, but I know there were more. They're trying to sort of sort through that to come out with a summary. The Secretary of Education, as Michelle alluded to, has held or will have held by next week 35 1-hour listening sessions. I have sat in on a few of them, and he is sitting in on all of them to listen to as many different groups of people. We did elementary students, we did middle and high school students, college students, special education students. There's been all different kinds of teachers, school board members, administrators, librarians, just about every group you can think of, to try to gather the feedback so that when we come out with suggestions, what they call guidance, it will have as many thoughts put into it as possible. But when it comes down to it, it's going to be most of the other people in this call who are going to be making the difficult decisions about what happens for the school year. And that's, I think, something that is hard for parents to understand, because they want me to be able to fix it. They want Michelle to be able to fix it. And, you know, that is not something that we're capable of doing. But we really do want to hear successes and challenges that are happening now, and concerns that parents have about everything, so that we can really make sure that we advise the decision makers the best way that we can. So I'm happy to listen. I really can't answer a lot of questions about our work because it's not up to me to answer. And I would just encourage you to pay attention to what the governor, he has, you know, press conferences most days. I think Tuesday is the day, but, you know, with current events, things have been shifting. So just try to pay attention. And then I know Abrar can mention about the school board work sessions. I don't think, it's only been a couple of years since I started really paying attention, but you can watch those live or watch them on YouTube later as a parent to sort of hear right away what it is that, and I've seen all of these people that are on here speaking during these sessions, and it's very interesting, and you will learn a lot, and then you won't be in the dark. And it's something that I often, you know, can do, like while I'm cooking dinner. You know, you got the school board on in the background. So that's basically my introduction, but I can try to answer questions if there are some. I cannot guarantee that I will know the answers. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. And we know certainly, you know, we had hoped that the governor would come out with his announcement prior to today so that you could share some of that information, but no doubt it will be coming out. And Anne-Marie, maybe later on, you can also share where folks can find that information when he does release it. I want to pose some questions. We've been receiving quite a bit of engagement on our feed here. So for the benefit of everyone, we can start off with one broad umbrella question that I know is, you know, coming in, and a number of these questions are related to. We know you guys have been working very hard, our staff, you know, specifically, I think within our schools and figuring out distance learning. What is going to happen with compensatory services, right? So for those kids who maybe, despite our best efforts, have fallen a little bit short of some of their goals. Maybe comment a little bit on the plans and moving ahead, what we're looking at, and where families can find out more information to access those kinds of supports. So, you know, Teresa, Jane, Denise, please go ahead.
Teresa, you want me to jump in, or do you want to?
Yeah, go ahead, Jane, and then I'll jump in.
Okay. So, yeah, so we've, you know, we understand this question. A lot of people, am I showing? Okay. So compensatory determinations are made at the IEP team level on a case-by-case basis. So families who have questions about that would need to be talking to the administrator of their child's school and or the PSL, or call our office. And we can certainly talk broadly about it, but until we know about coming back to school, those decisions can't be made until we are returning to school. And so compensatory services are, you know, offered when the school district has failed to provide services according to an IEP, or provided a free appropriate public education. That's the legal standard of that. So in this era of COVID, that's an unexpected, unanticipated situation, not caused by the school division. But what we will do is take a look case by case when families, you know, have concerns about their child and their progress or lack of or FAPE. Then we will work as teams to come to consensus on any kind of service later. There's also, oh, go ahead, Teresa.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to add, I think we're anticipating that across all student populations, students that are not in special education are going to need a level of recovery and remediation. So we are looking as part of the task force of what could that look like when we come into the fall? And what are those, whether it's compensatory through the IEP, or it's, here are the remediation services that we need to provide, whether that be during the school day, during intervention periods, in addition to or on a Saturday. So I think we're looking across the broad spectrum of how we're going to provide recovery for all of our students. So, you know, compensatory or remediation, compensatory, as Jane says, typically is a legal term within IDEA. And so we are going to look at those on an individual basis through the IEP team, but we're looking and exploring of how can we, through additional stimulus funding, how can we provide, maybe we need additional service providers, related service providers to help to bring in to do the additional speech services or OT or PT. So we're looking at that broadly through the task force work right now.
Thank you for making those distinctions. It is important to consider, you know, the changes that are happening for folks who are watching who may not know the terminology. Right, you know, we're talking about, there's legal aspects of special ed, but then there's also the remediation piece that Teresa, you helpfully included. So as we look ahead here, I want to make sure we take some of our audience questions. We can get started with those, and I'll certainly pose some additional ones based on these. Kim, if you want to go ahead and start us off.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to actually scroll to the top to make sure I got some of the first ones. All right, so I think we start off with Cindy Bendel. Is the school considering outdoor programs for the return to school? It would be great for social distancing, even if it's just a part-time basis. Our autism class has 8 to 9 kids, so I feel it could be manageable.
I'm not aware of right now in the conversations of, and hopefully I understood the question correctly, that just outdoor programming that we would bring students in. There has been some conversation on the task force of what if we had to come in on staggered schedules or 50% capacity or 25% capacity. Do we just focus on core or do we focus on core and electives? So there have been a lot of conversations about the academic piece, but I have to be honest, we haven't had a lot of discussion about the outdoor programming. Certainly, I'm willing to take that back and have further conversation and bring it up to the task force.
And since it touched on, the extended school year, let's talk a little bit about that. So help us, understand what's available to families in ESY. I see that actually the next question is, whether a student can participate if it's not in their IEP, if there have been any eligibility, changes or more flexibility as a result of COVID. Maybe we can start with that as well.
Sure, happy to talk about that. So ESY is something that needs to be in the IEP. So I know our school staff are working furiously to address with families whether or not a student qualifies for ESY. So ESY is different from some of the other remedial programming and summer programs that are being offered, which our students with disabilities may be able to participate in, and they don't need an IEP for those. For ESY, you do need an IEP. So, if a family is concerned they don't have it yet, they just need to talk to their child's case manager about that this week.
And I can add that in the for the adapted curriculum students, they will be getting a packet weekly that the teachers will be working from for each of the 4 weeks of ESY. And that's going to go out to all adapted curriculum students, whether you have ESY or not. The general ed students, students accessing the general ed curriculum will be getting a packet if they are accessing ESY. And all early childhood special education students, even if they don't have ESY on their IEP, will also be getting a distance learning packet one time at the beginning of the summer with 4 weeks of work in it, 4 weeks of support in it. If you get ESY as a part of your early childhood special ed programming, then you will also get virtual visits by the teacher. Adapted curriculum will also have virtual visits with a half-an-hour group time, synchronous learning every day, 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday, followed by small group or individual group throughout the remainder of the morning.
You're muted.
It's happens every time, but no, another one of our related points that can kind of enable some of these expansions. And I know in the budget that the school board had just passed, we were looking at some of the supports we can add. I would love for folks to comment, for staff, and then maybe Anne-Marie from your perspective on the state, with the funding, right? So the federal government, for our audience, that they were talking about a stimulus package. They voted on the CARES Act, which ended up giving some of that money to our state, and our governor allocated about $22 million to our school system to be able to provide some of those supports that we're anticipating. I know, Teresa, you alluded to this a little bit earlier. Maybe elaborate on what you're anticipating are some of the needs and hopefully some of the plans on this. I know it ultimately is the superintendent that's going to be presenting his plan to the school board for ultimately a vote. But I'd love to hear from you guys how you're thinking through the budgetary situation and what allocations might come forward.
Sure, I can speak broadly. It seems to be a moving target. And again, as you mentioned, Abrar, that the superintendent really makes the decisions about how that money or what's going to go into that particular grant. So, we are looking at what are the intervention services and programs that we need to provide to students. What social emotional supports, additional supports do we need to put in place, anticipating the needs of students when they return in the fall. A lot of this has been around PPE, personal protective equipment, and cleaning, and what that's going to take for us to return if we're anticipating a social distancing environment. So those are the big buckets that I can speak to, but the superintendent, again, has not made any final decisions on that. But there are some limitations as to what the grant will allow. So it's pretty broad, but that there are some limitations. So those are the big buckets.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It has to be specific to the crisis and everything that's going on. And Marie, I see you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, I would just like to add, so the governor's going to sort of announce like the big broad outlines of how schools can reopen and, you know, the guidelines around that. And then through the summer, our work group is going to be kind of getting into the nitty gritty. Like somebody asked about the outdoor schools or, you know, things like that. Those are all ideas that get funneled into our work group. And then we sort of kick them around and see like, you know, how would that work? And then we're going to be putting together, you know, really detailed, specific suggestions that we are hoping to have done by end of July or August. It's a moving target, like Teresa said, like, you know, we don't really know what's happening, but we're trying to work as hard as we can to really come up with some concrete examples and then put some dollar amounts on those, because the General Assembly is going to be coming in for a special session in August. And we are going to try to have some asks from the Secretary of Education so that we can see if we can get more funding from the state to our local school divisions. Again, we don't really get a say, but we can certainly put forward ideas for what we think school districts are going to need, and then it's really up to them. So I would just say, as a parent, if you don't know who your Virginia legislators are, you should learn who they are and talk to them, just like you should know who your school board members are and talk to them. Obviously, if we can advocate for federal funding, more stimulus money, that would be great. That's sort of where PTA approaches things from an advocacy perspective, is trying to get the resources into the hands of the people who make the decisions, so that we can, you know, have flexibility. We know that there's going to, like I think it was Teresa was talking about the remediation. We know there's going to need to be things put in place for all students, not just special education students. So how do we get the funds when it seems like everybody's already cutting their budget? So that is a concern that is being taken very seriously at the state level. What we can do about it, I can't do anything about it, but what they are going to be able to do about it is remains to be seen. But it is something that people are thinking about. So you should just know, FCPS people, that, you know, we're trying we're trying to get you guys some more money.
Yeah, it's $1 million. I mean, it's well, dollar, but yeah, no, certainly even on the school board's level, our conversations with the Board of Supervisors about the money, you know, they've decided not to up the tax, which was a part of the plan this year. So everyone's, you know, scavenging for that extra funding that we know we need for these services. Kim, I want to turn it to you. I know we're continuing to receive some audience questions, so go ahead, please pose one for us.
So I believe we were talking a little bit about student vulnerability and such. So just to kind of keep that same energy going, we have one from Sonda Hines, and the question reads: so many of our students with disabilities are medically fragile and won't be able to return for in-person instruction, or families have other family members at risk. What does FCPS see as its responsibility towards those students who cannot return? What would support services look like?
So I'll start, and then I'm going to ask Jane to weigh in here. We just had this conversation again today. We have this conversation frequently because we are very concerned about our students that are medically fragile or immunocompromised. So we need to educate all of our children. That is our responsibility. So if we were to return in person, this is one of the scenarios that we're looking at. What that would look like. What if staff can't return? What about students who couldn't return? So we would look at, we're looking at beefing up our online learning, and Abrar knows a little bit about this because this has been brought up to the school board. So beefing up our online programming for those students. As Michelle said, there's some students that are thriving in this online environment in the virtual learning. It may be that we need to offer students homebound services if that's what needs to happen. And so we are anticipating a higher need for homebound teachers and having to provide instruction for our students in various ways. So those are just a few of the ways that we're looking at supporting our medically fragile children. Jane, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, basically you said what I was thinking. The one caveat I would say is, we're still trying to describe and plan for all of the different scenarios and looking at, having enough staff who are willing to go in and do homebound. And, but that is one of the ones that we've heard before, that there's some parent concerns out there about us being able to offer homebound. So we're definitely dialoguing about it.
Thank you. And where can families anticipate updates or additional information as you continue to come up with decisions, and perhaps some of those will be voted on by the school board? I'm not exactly, sure what the plans are.
Well, I hope once we present to the board and we have some good direction as to where we need to go, we'll be able to tease out those plans more. So we have been sending out a weekly newsletter to students or parents of students with disabilities, as well as students that have active 504 plans. So we hope to continue that message, maybe not weekly, but we think this has been a good way to provide some updated information or tips and resources for families. So that would be one way. We'll also continue to update our webpage as information is made available or approved. But honestly, there's a lot of unknowns, as Anne-Marie referenced. There are a lot of unknowns, and we are waiting for some direction from the governor that we anticipated was going to come this week, but it sounds like it may come next week. And again, we've all kind of referenced this changes almost sometimes on a daily basis, but definitely on a weekly basis. So we do hope we'll have more answers, one from the governor next week, and then after we present our plans to the board as we move along this summer. So it will probably be later in the summer.
Thank you, Teresa. Kim, please go ahead. And
yeah, I'm just taking a look at them, trying to organize them to make sure it stays on topic. So this is kind of like different to the topic, but actually kind of like ties in a little bit. I've seen a lot of them talking about like strategies and navigation of how things are going to go. So there is Daphne Huber, and she says, with regards to IEP meetings happening now, there's no discussion about current state of children and strategies for the fall. Concerns about our children's regressions and current educational needs are met either with silence and okay. How can parents make informed decisions about our children's placement and goals without the full picture of where our students' abilities are now and what the school year will look in the future?
The one thing I'll chime in, and Teresa, you add if there's something else. IEP teams don't yet know, because none of us know what the governor's decision is for the stages and the plans for opening back up. And so an IEP team doesn't have that knowledge yet about, are we for sure coming back to school face-to-face? That's one of the options that I know is being looked at. So yeah, IEP teams don't have a lot of answers. We wish we had all the answers. We anticipate that there will need to be continual fine tuning once we get closer to the fall and start of the school year, so that we meet children's needs then.
thank you, Jane. And I do want to bring in Michelle from SEPTA real quick. I know she has, some strategies on how families can stay organized, how they can keep track of the progress of their children. So Michelle, please help our audience kind of get some understanding of how they can do that effectively.
Sure, and I also want to just tag in on the last subject that was being discussed, because as Jane was just saying about fine tuning with our teams, parents, it's really important to remember that you can request that the IEP team reconvene at any time. You don't have to wait until the date on your IEP. If you think that there needs to be a change to the meeting, you always have the right to go ahead and request that that team come back to the table again. So that's certainly something to keep in mind. I know it's something I've been keeping in mind for my own kids with their IEPs. And the idea of transition is something that I actually shared on the call with the secretary. the other day as well, that there's lots of transition questions that we need to address. For example, if you have a child right now who's going to be transitioning from elementary to middle school or from middle school to high school, yes, there's certainly the transition into the physical building. And usually there's orientations and there's, fun visits ahead of time. Obviously, that's not going to happen until we're at the point of actually going to those buildings. But for our kids, a lot of the anxiety comes around that unknown. So we need to be thinking about ways of transitioning kids so that they get to meet their teachers and they get to lay eyes on them and start to attempt to have a way of building a relationship with those teachers, either prior to the school year or maybe even for the first couple weeks of school, that it really needs to be spent more on just getting to know each other, because it's really hard to do that when you're sitting here on the computer. The other piece about transitioning is that there's also a shift in expectations and a shift in responsibilities when a kid goes from elementary to middle or middle to high school. And for many of our students, when they're sitting at home, it's not going to feel different. And the work is different and the expectations are different. And so we're going to need to think about, how do we transition all of our students, not just even the ones who are receiving special ed, but especially those students, so that they're mentally preparing for that next phase of their life in that next level of schooling. The other big piece that I have great concerns about and that I've heard about a lot is the social emotional work that's going to need to be done with our students. And I'm so appreciative that there's been a lot of attention and focus on adding more mental health support into our schools. Jenna White just gave an amazing webinar for us the other night on trauma-based learning and trauma-informed schools. And one thing she said that really struck me is that it's not about having social emotional programs in our schools, it's having trauma-informed people in our schools. And there's definitely a difference there. So, I really encourage the school folks who are on here, but also our parents, to learn more about trauma-informed schools. And because whether you know it or feel it or not, this is traumatic for all of us, especially for our kids, but I think just as much for our parents, for our teachers. We're all having different degrees of primary trauma, secondary trauma. It's really hard. And so I really encourage everyone to keep that in mind primarily, because if you're not taking care of that feeling piece, you're not available to learn. Briefly, in terms of suggestions for parents, one really big piece that I always encourage parents during the school year, and I will encourage for the end of the spring and throughout the summer, is to be documenting. Document everything. Your emails, your phone calls. If your child is in ESY, document the days that they're getting Zoom sessions, the number of minutes that they're spending and what they're working on. I just made a very quick and dirty little chart, where you just have goal and date and what you worked on. Just keep some kind of simple notes so that you're monitoring your child's progress, because that's going to also come into play when we look at compensatory services for kids. We don't know what kids are not going to retain. We don't know what they're going to miss at this point, but it will help you a lot if you have documentation. The other big piece is that while summer may not feel too different from how school feels now, I would encourage parents to use the summer to get your paperwork organized. SEPTA did a workshop a year and a half ago on your IEP binder, and I have a sample very fat binder here. But I have 3 kids who all have had IEPs since preschool, so we have lots of binders in our house. But I would encourage you to take the time and take over a table or a floor in part of your house and go through all of those papers and get out your hole puncher and get some binders and actually file away in some organized fashion that works for you, all those papers, those IEPs, those progress reports, the evaluations, work samples, any category that you have, get your binder going. This is a great opportunity to do that. If you're connected with SEPTA on Facebook, you're welcome to even just pose a question about how do I organize a binder? And lots of us will be happy to tell you and fill you in on that as well. And maybe that's something SEPTA could do over the summer as well. We're still in our planning phase. So those are just a couple of parent-focused thoughts and suggestions for you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Certainly that was comprehensive. And, for our viewers, I think this actually brings us to a topic that I know came up in some of the Q&As and streams we'd done before. So I'd love to pose this. Certainly staff can address it and anyone else on here. Is some of the confusion that was surrounding, TLPs, what is a TLP, IEPs, what does it guarantee me? Is it different? Maybe, if staff can help frame for us, what's legally binding, how can families understand what these different things are, and how can they expect to use them moving into the summer and the fall as they track their children's goals?
Okay, so a temporary learning plan, or TLP, was designed because with the unknown of the initial pandemic emergency as how we would have every teacher and family amend the IEP, because actually the procedures with amending an IEP are fairly complex and time consuming. So the basic TLP format was designed to help families and teachers get on paper what is going to be a priority for you? What are some goals, accommodations, and service that can be done virtually? Because that was the circumstance we found ourselves in. And so a TLP was, and is an agreement. This is what, we can do. And parents, we ask teachers, trained teachers, to ask parents for their input. So it is different from an IEP. It doesn't have all of the same parts and pieces and legal requirements to the extent that a full IEP does, but it was designed for this interim emergency timeframe as what we can do, what's the best we can do to get services to children while they're at home and in a virtual format. So when we come back to school, as we've talked tonight, we're looking at all the different possibilities, and our hope is that students will be returning to something that is a face-to-face. We don't know that yet, though, and so we want, with some time to plan, we're going to establish a way for schools to have IEP addendums with families to reflect what is what's available and what's doable for students in whatever our new reality ends up being in September. So I think I covered sort of the basics of that question.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for clarifying for everyone what that is and why it's useful. So I know Kim is receiving a flood of audience questions. This is a topic that I know many, many families have plenty of questions about. So Kim, please go ahead and start us off with our first chunk of, our first theme. Yeah.
I wanted to also just jump in.
Sorry, go ahead, Michelle. Yeah.
We've heard a lot of questions about this on our groups, and there's been great discussion. And something that Teresa Johnson did share with us through our previous webinar and so forth is that the TLP in and of itself is not a legally binding document. It is not a document under IDEA like our IEPs are. So parents, you have the choice as to whether you're going to agree to the TLP or not. And I'm not saying this to cause trouble and aggravation with our colleagues from FCPS, but it's important to me that parents know that the TLP is a solution for this temporary situation, but you don't have to go with the TLP. And just from personal experience, I said to my IEP team, this situation that we're in right now is going to go on indefinitely. Let's alter my kid's IEP to fit the circumstances that we're in now. And we did. And so there's definitely different ways of doing that, but I really just want parents to be sure that they understand their rights from that regard.
Thank you, Michelle, for that clarification. And I know one thing, Teresa, correct me if I'm wrong, that was consistently brought up to reassure families is that the IEP and the goals that were agreed to by the team are still to be met, right? That is still a goal. Your child is not being undersold, or, it's not that we're going to backtrack on any of this now. The temporary learning plans were meant to be helpful in the adjustment, but when we do hopefully return to normalcy, there will be follow-up on those goals that were originally agreed to.
That's correct.
Thank you. Great. So Kimberly, go ahead and read some of these copious questions.
Yes, let me scroll way back to the top again. I was trying to organize them, but honestly, we've kind of gone through many different subject areas. So I think from now, I'm just going to go to the next question that was in the stream. Hopefully I didn't miss anything. All right, here we go. I'm seeing other areas of the US with budget shortfalls, and they are starting to reduce staffing. Where is FCPS with regards to this? Are they holding steady or are they considering cuts? Abrar, I think you can kind of speak to that too.
Yeah, I can speak to this. I mean, for now, we've been committed. The Board of Supervisors is also kind of in a similar vein, and we're trying to partner in this to retain who we have, and we have a commitment to doing that. So the board has had conversations way early during COVID to continue with that, and that, you know, we'll continue planning to do it, especially since the needs are only increasing. So it really doesn't make sense to roll back if we're able to preserve what we do have. And that's also why you'll see some of the budgetary conversations that are very difficult, but are geared towards being a little bit conservative and cautious so that we can continue doing that in the long term.
Should I go and ask the next question? Cool. So I think the next question was from Amanda. Oh, the last question is from Cindy Bendel, by the way. Next question is from Amanda Campbell. While compensatory services are determined for individuals at the IEP team level, there's obviously going to be a huge need for them. Many families have received none of the related services during the time of virtual learning since April 14th. What is SPS doing to prepare for both the cost and staffing needs that will arise?
And to tag into that question, just as an example, I sat in on a IEP meeting with another family the other day, and they were talking about the need for testing. And this was about 2 or 3 weeks ago. The school psychologist said that they already had a backlog of 43 students that needed testing and evaluation. So there's definitely questions about what are we going to do in terms of that type of backlog as well.
So I will say that part of the meetings that Teresa has mentioned, that we're all a part of this instruction task force and making a recommendation to the superintendent and to the board eventually, that we have needs to plan for expenses for services, whether that's you know, additional special ed service, how to evaluations. We're going to have staff so that we can do meetings, you know, once we get back face to face. And many of you may know that there's not only frequently asked questions that we have posted on our website, so has the Virginia Department of Education. And, you know, and they emphasize to this question that frequently gets asked, what if, you know, you're not testing right now, how are we going to have our student evaluated? And it says, you know, the answer is we can't evaluate until school resumes. And so, yes, we're all worried about that. We're making tentative plans until we know something more concrete about how exactly we will apportion funding toward making up service, if that's determined, and making up, you know, having to deal with this backlog of evaluations.
I'm just going to weigh in, you know, to Amanda's question. And, you know, service providers are going to need to evaluate students as soon as they return to school. So your speech clinicians, your OT, PT to determine the level of regression. So those decisions will have to be made once children are assessed. And kind of going back, and I see there's a question here back to the CARES funding. We talked a little bit about that. Again, there are some restrictions on what the CARES funding can support, and it is really about the COVID emergency and the interventions and remediations and recovery pieces that are going to be needed for students. So just to keep in mind that it is going to be an individual decision for every child once we can get back and assess where students are performing in their skill level.
Thank you, Teresa. Kim, go ahead.
Okay. And the next question is also from Amanda Campbell. What will students who access both the Gen Ed curriculum and the adapted curriculum receive?
I think that her question was probably related to ESY. that there's the question about kids who get adapted curriculum get the adapted curriculum packets, kids who are in gen ed get the gen ed packets, but there's a lot of kids who are in both. So I think that's where her question.
So maybe on a broader level, yeah, Teresa, if you can comment on some of the collaboration happening between you guys and instructional services as to how you're figuring that out.
Yeah, sure, and Denise may want to weigh in here. I know it's going to have to be similar to what we've done in the setting where there have been times where if a parent wasn't getting both packets, it was my understanding that many students were getting both packets once we got the initial feedback. And if they weren't, then they needed to reach out to their principal or to our office, instructional services, so that special ed instruction, to ensure that we can provide that to those students. But it was my understanding through instruction, and maybe Denise or Jane can corroborate that, but they were getting both packets.
Yeah, so the instructional services department is preparing 2 packets, one in language arts and one in math. And those packets are going to go out to every student K through 8 in Fairfax who are accessing general ed curriculum. The adapted curriculum, students accessing the adapted curriculum will get a very specific adapted curriculum packet as well. If you were currently on the mail list to receive both, then you should continue on the mail list to receive both. But again, as Teresa said, if you don't receive both the general ed packet offered by instructional services and the adapted curriculum packet offered by the Department of Special Services, then you can feel free to reach out to our office and we can make sure that you get put onto the list. The packets are due to be mailed out the 17th of June to be in your hands by the 29th of June for the first day of ESY. You will receive one adapted curriculum packet a week, and then you'll receive just the single at the beginning of the summer general ed packet for the language arts and one for math. And that will be just a one-time mail out.
Thank you so much, Denise, for outlining that. I do want to be respectful of the time that I, asked of our staff. So just a quick clarifying question, and for the rest of them, I'll try to put them into a wrap up. For those who are scheduled to graduate this spring, if you would comment just briefly on evaluation decisions for them, what that's going to look like, since it's timely, I guess, with classes ending next week.
Well, so I will say that in general, if a student graduates with a general diploma or an advanced or regular diploma, then their eligibility ends. Now, I do know that, there could be some special circumstances out there where an IEP team and a family agreed to some sort of an evaluation that hasn't been able to be implemented. And if that's the case, then there would be carryover later once we can do that evaluation to provide that. But that's really sort of an unusual circumstance, and I'm not sure exactly the questioner's other intent with the question, but that's sort of the broad answer.
Thank you so much, Jane. So as we kind of wrap up our discussion here, although I know there are many more questions and we could stay here all night, but I just want to pose a final opportunity to offer some thoughts and hopefully some direct line resources for families. I know a number of these questions as I'm reading them here, and for those who are, typing these questions up, we are seeing all of your questions, with achievement gaps, right? The challenge that remains for students with special needs, the consistent, the system's commitment to providing the best, and then of course having the implementation challenges that will be the case for a system of 190,000 students. If you could just address some of those, maybe Teresa, if you want to start us off, and just giving families a sense of what is being considered. I'll speak to, at least as being a school board member, the level of rigor that we really are trying to have with paying attention to the many needs and considering the voices that are coming forward in areas that we may not have even thought of before. And I know Teresa's team is diligently considering. So we've been impressed, but certainly careful and monitoring what's happening. And I would encourage families who, want to see how the school system is handling it to look at some of the budget conversations that just happened I want to say last week, now that, we're losing track of time. And I'd encourage you, we had a stream that went into more depth on this, but there were a number of priorities assigned to the special ed community specifically and to supports for that, for those families. So I just want to make sure folks know that it is being reflected in our numbers and we're doing our best to do that. No doubt there's a lot more to go. So I'll let Teresa comment a little bit on how she sees it from her side of things.
Sure. And thanks for the opportunity, Abrar. I just wanted to clarify that we are actually, our data shows we're closing the achievement gap with students, we're narrowing the achievement gap with students with disabilities in math. We have been the last couple of years. And actually our gaps for reading or language arts are not increasing, they're just steady. So I appreciate that we are making progress in the system and what we're doing. We've been making some very good data-driven decisions. We have developed the region teams that are taking a team approach that include the region representatives and a representative from language arts, from math, from science, from special ed. And those teams look at the actual data by school to determine where to put the most resources, and whether that be human resources or capital resources that go into what specific schools. So I feel like we're making really good progress, and I'm very appreciative that the board approved the resources to go for this budget for FY21, adding 5 additional resource teachers, sorry, in addition to the intensive behavior supports that'll help support some of our schools that are most challenged. Those teams, and why they've been important, is because they've been able to go into schools and do very intensive supports, modeling, shoulder to shoulder teaching in collaboration with teachers. So thank you for that. And I'm very appreciative of it. So I feel we're on the right path. We're making decisions based on data, and we need to continue to make those decisions and put the resources where they're needed.
And that's really to you and your team's credit, truly, Teresa, Jane, Denise, and in your leadership in this, the legacy you're leaving with, the system with. So thank you for all that you've done. I know I want to make sure everyone else has the opportunity, if in closing out, to share any message with the community or final resources that you think would be beneficial for parents.
I actually want to just say thank you to Teresa and Jane and Denise. On behalf of the parents, I'm in the hot seat for asking the hard questions. And I do want to also let you know that parents recognize that this is an incredibly difficult situation for all of us. And we're not walking in your shoes and you're not walking in ours, but they're all really difficult paths right now. So as a person, I want to say thank you for everything that you're doing. Really appreciate that we're all figuring this out.
Can I just say also, I have gotten to hear a lot from parents and teachers across the state. And even though Fairfax County got a little bit of bad press at the beginning of this, you really have been knocking it out of the park as far as what you have been doing for your students. One of the things that has come up on a statewide level is how can we ensure that all of the school divisions are offering the same level, because school divisions compare themselves to each other. And so a lot of times parents get kind of caught in the weeds with their own kids. I mean, I've done that. You're sort of focusing on what's happening to you. And, there are a lot of school divisions that don't have the access to broadband. They don't have access to technology. Their funding situations are extremely dire. That's not to say that there's not room for improvement for everyone, because there always is room for improvement. But we should be very thankful. I am very thankful to be a parent here. There have been a lot of really good things that have been happening, and I'm hopeful that there will be a way for schools, administrators, teachers, and parents to share those things. I know that I've emailed a few people already with some things that I have seen that I have liked, and I think that's going to be how we improve moving forward. I just did want to mention, I know a few people have mentioned the Virginia Department of Education. Their website is doe.virginia.gov. You can just Google Virginia Department of Education, and that's where all of the press releases go up. It's not a bells and whistles type of site. It's very basic, but when the governor makes his announcements, when the Secretary of Education or the state superintendent announce things, that's where all of those things are going to go. And you know, if you're a wonky person like me, you can already go through there and see some of the things that have been mentioned. Questions about special education are up there. You can read through all of that. People put a lot of time into it. It doesn't always filter down to parents. The governor does his press conferences via social media, at Facebook, Twitter. I think the news channels often cover them if you want to listen next week. But then all of that stuff will go out in a press release, and it will all be available on the Department of Education website. And then, Abrar, you can mention when I think you have a work session coming up pretty soon where everybody's going to present this to you.
I was going to say, yeah, in forecasting, you know, distance learning and special ed specifically, a couple things to pay attention to. So as soon as the governor makes his announcement, which by the way, we're not privy to either right now, our school board will be putting our heads together. Certainly staff will be looking to ways that they're going to be implementing some of the whatever requirements come from them, and then scheduling out meetings for when we're going to be voting on different things. I know that later in June, we're going to be reviewing some of the distance learning plans potentially for the fall, or whether it's going to be in person. All of that is going to be proposed to us from the superintendent for the division broadly, which certainly would include the special ed you know, community and students. And then beyond that, thinking long term, the audit committee of the school board just approved a review in general of special education. And that's extremely important for those who are concerned, especially in the long term. There will be an independent review of how we're administrating pretty much all of our special education programs to look at where some of the gaps are, where we're doing really well, and make some, as Teresa mentioned, right, data-based, data-driven policy decisions as to where we want to allocate resources and what changes we want to make moving ahead. So those are a couple of things I'd mention. As always, I like to remind you guys as to where to find that. So when you go to fcps.edu, the main website, to the left, you'll see the menu. You click on school board and you'll see a tab that says board docs. That's where you can find the agendas for all the upcoming school board meetings. And so you know what's coming up, and any documents that are relevant, like presentations from staff, or you know, any other kind of document will be attached there, so you can follow along as the conversation is happening. You're also, you know, fcps.edu/TV is where 3 of our channels are, where these meetings are also live broadcast, and where you can watch them in the feed online on the website directly. So would highly encourage your engagement if you're able to. I understand that our special ed, you know, community tends to be very busy as well, taking care of our kids, and certainly in this time even more so. But I wanted to make sure you all were aware of that. And the weekly email that Teresa outlined, make sure you're on that list, and that you're checking your inbox for those updates. So with that, unless anyone has any final thoughts or anything they want to add, unmute yourself now. Otherwise, we're good? Yeah, Teresa, no, yes?
Good.
We're good? Okay. Otherwise, thank you all so much for tuning in. As always, Thursdays and Sundays at 7 p.m. Our next one is going to be with a number of organizations who are going to talk about different programs like housing and food, you know, service supports. If anyone could benefit from something like a service dog, we're going to bring 8 different organization representatives to talk about what they offer and how you can help in our next stream. Thank you again for tuning in. Until next time, have a good evening.